Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. A very warm welcome to this episode of our Keys webinar, Ipsos's monthly broadcast to our clients around the world. We're delighted to have you with us today. We've got clients from over 80 countries present on this call, which particularly seems apposite, bearing in mind our topic, which is Ipsos Global Trends. It's a report, a piece of analysis, a resource that's now 10 years old, and we're here with you to share our perspectives on this latest report. 10 years ago, the world felt different, but we could also see certain similarities, and we're going to reflect on what's changed since then and how we can better prepare for future changes on the road ahead. We'll also be thinking about what's staying the same. Back in our first report, 2014, we were navigating the new, and at that time, 6 in 10 of us were already looking at our screens all the time. That was what the respondents said then. We'll look at what they say now through the lens of our new report. That report is called In Search of a New Consensus. And with that in mind, we have a wonderful group of colleagues here to share with us the latest findings. Delighted to have with us our Chief Executive, Ben Page, who's here with me in our London office today. Not only is Ben our Chief Executive, he was the lead researcher in that first study back in 2014, so well placed to give us his wise advice. We'll then be talking with Billy, who's in South London today, so not too far away, and she's going to be giving us a panorama of the 9 key trends that emerge from this time's analysis. We'll then be in Kuala Lumpur with Paki, where it's very late now, it's 11 o'clock, so thank you for staying with us, Paki. He's going to be sharing with us his perspectives on looking at the findings through the lens of a number of different markets across Asia and reminding us how important the context to all of this is. And then finally, we'll be finishing in Geneva with Arno, who's going to help us understand how we can develop really great communications and advertising that cuts through in today's environment. But to kick off, delighted to welcome to the stage Ben. Before I do that, a reminder that you can ask questions as you go through, and we'll be taking those towards the end. And if you do like the slides, we'll be sending them to you afterwards. So this resource, we hope, will be something you can be using in your own work. And with that in mind, Ben is going to introduce the report. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks very much. And the thing about Ipsos Global Trends is that it's something that now lets us really appreciate the context that people at brands, governments are operating in across 50 countries. And we've been now, because we've been doing it now for 10 years or so, we've got a very clear idea about what's changing and what's not. And during that time, we've also built a framework which we use to really understand what's happening. And I think it's important just to stop for a minute before we dive into trends, just to look at our theory of change that we're using here and just being very clear about what we're actually talking about at different levels. Because sometimes you'll read trends reports and people will be saying, you know, the macro force is sourdough in baking. We're very clear that macro forces are major trends, or in a sense shifts, things that affect the whole world. So classic example would be climate change. Another would be demography. You know, we know that we can predict roughly how many people will be in the country based on the birth rates 20 years ago. Those type of things, the invention of generative AI and its finite and then its release into the wild, those are macro forces. They're not necessarily things that are often confused with trends, like which we call. So in this model, we're looking at the macro forces that affect the whole world. They're on the left. We often measure shifts in human values, and we've got 23 values we've identified in this survey, and that we can see happening in human society. And then there are more surface, frothy things that you might notice in a shopping mall or your local high street. I'll give you 2 examples of signals of change we can see. So one is the first vegan butcher opening in Amsterdam recently. So what's that telling us? Is that a new trend? Well, it's certainly a signal of a change of course towards eating less meat in many societies, and there are two drivers of eating less meat. One is the greater interest in health, which we talk about in this study, but the other is simply climate change. The carbon footprint of beef and lamb is enormous relative, for example, to a vegetable-based diet. So though you can see that shift on the horizon, that's in human behavior. The signal, though, is what you're picking up in the high street. Another one, let's go to Japan. Paki will be talking about Asia later. With a declining birth rate, with an aging population, massive demand for humanoid robots. We can see that in Japan. Will it come further around the world? Probably, because AI, a macro force, is driving down the cost of those technologies that allow that. And as migration is a huge issue in many Western societies, robots may or may not be more acceptable. So signals at what we observe, often sometimes temporary, sometimes not so, shifts more deeper, and then of course the macro forces, those D changes that are very hard to avoid and affect the whole world. And of course all of these things interact with each other. So those are the macro forces. In terms of the 9 trends, they're here along with 23 values that we've distilled. And in the report, which has got 5 million data points, we've looked at how strongly each of those values is held across each of the 50 markets that we cover in the survey. But just to keep things brief, if we look at the 9 global trends, let's just quickly introduce them to you, because we're focusing on that in this broadcast. So the first is the fracturing of globalization. I don't need to talk about that for very long. I think for brands, what's interesting is what that means in terms of how you express yourself locally and globally, and what your opportunities are. Splintered societies, something we can see across the world, these divisions within societies that are sometimes as big or bigger than divisions with other countries, and in how that works out in a cultural aspect is huge. You think of a well-known drinks company which made a small mistake in terms of branding one of its bids in the US recently, massive implications by not fully understanding the society or thinking about its impact in the society they were working in. Another one is climate convergence. One of the few things that everybody on the planet agrees with is that we're in clear and present danger if we don't reduce carbon emissions. We don't agree on the solution, and we expect, of course, brands and governments to do more than individuals, but it's certainly something that is going to not go away, and we can see it all around us. Just look at the rainfall. Techno wonder, again, we'll talk about this, but this is both the wonder and in some ways the wonderment at what technology can do for us and might be doing to us. And Billy Ng will talk more about that in a minute. We've then got conscientious health, and Simon and I were looking at what we were starting to detect back in 2014. Interestingly, the health trend rose up in particular after the pandemic, and one big shift in the world, which is very clear, is the rise in concern about mental health, which now in our other tracking has outstripped concern about physical health. If you give people a list of what they're most worried about in terms of health, cancer and heart disease are now below mental health. But in this trend here, we're looking at people's greater interest in their overall well-being. We'll hear about that in a second. And then, of course, we have how humans are going to react to all of these things. And one way to react to an uncertain present is simply to retreat to the past. And we'll talk about the rise in nostalgia that we can see across the 50 markets that we're covering here. And that has all sorts of opportunities and hazards, I suppose, for individual brands. We then have a new trend that we've identified, nouveau nihilism. We are, after all, a French company. In other words, the idea that if you can't change the world, if you feel it's all too overwhelming, if you feel that you aren't ever going to get a good job or be able to do what you want, or even to afford to buy a home, despite your parents being able to, maybe actually you just say, sod it, I'll just relax, chill out and enjoy myself, helped by my favorite drinks. Another key facet in this world of misinformation and too much information, infobesity, that we can see is the power of trust. Now, trust is sometimes in short supply, but what this shows is that for the brands, for the individuals, for the governments that are able to retain it, you have huge impact, and it becomes all the more valuable when it's in short supply. And then finally, with all of this stuff going on in the world, this more complex world that most people are now handling and young people are growing up in, another escape, apart from nihilism, is just to escape individualism. You not be able to change the world, you may not be able to do everything, but you can at least make yourself better, you can look after yourself. So those, ladies and gentlemen, 100 miles an hour are our 9 trends, underpinned by 23 values, which we discussed in the report. But I'd now like to hand over to Billy Ying, our Head of Trends and Futures, who will take you through in a little bit more detail those 9 trends and the data behind them. Billy.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm delighted to be here with you today. So we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to whip right ahead. So from the starting point, you probably hear the words such as deglobalization, offshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, and these are all terms that we're all used to when it comes to the idea of globalization or globalization fracturing. But when we look beyond the surface and we look at that shift level that Ben told us and have a think about this from a human level, while we see a rise in attitudes agreeing towards globalization being good for us personally, we're also seeing a rise in positive attitudes towards our own countries as well. And this is a tension that we can clearly see in the data. So around the same amount of people, about 6 in 10 of us, agree that both globalization is good for me personally and that they feel proud of their country. But for those of you who are marketeers in the room today, you will be thinking, well, where there's a tension, there's also an opportunity. And Starbucks has capitalized on this via one of their flagship cafes in China by really embracing this traditional view of a Chinese tea house. So really embracing that cultural norm, but also being true to the global Starbucks brand. So from your perspective, think about the unique value that you can offer and play into the benefits of globalization, but also recognizing that people have an appeal towards local or national products. So this idea of global. Now, thinking about national pride is one way of thinking of a positive way of focusing on one's nation, but there is also a negative side as well, which we're calling nativism. And this is something that we're seeing is driving splintered societies today. So a backlash towards immigration, a concern that not everyone in our societies are sharing the same values. And this also plays out at a family level. So we asked for the first time this year, are there tensions between people within your family that don't hold the same values? And about 50% of us around the world agree with this. So this splintering in societies is also coming down to the family unit level now too. So that's one angle that's driving the splintering of societies that we see. Another angle is the more than 7 in 10 of us who agree that having large differences in income and wealth is bad for society overall. And frankly, it's not surprising when we see that 12% of the world's wealth is owned by only 0.01% of people worldwide. It's a real challenge here in terms of that wealth distribution across the world. Another angle to splintered societies is this idea of equality, people trying to achieve this from a gender perspective, from an age perspective, from a sexual orientation perspective, and also from a race perspective. So the splintering of societies we see in signals such as riots on the streets in some of the countries that we live in. And what can you as a brand or business do about this? Well, it's going to be important that you think about the tensions at play and think about how you can create content that reaches across the divides and heals those divisions. And Arno's going to show us some great examples of this a little bit later on today. And it's really important that we heal these divisions because we've got some huge global challenges at that macro level at hand that we need to solve, such as climate. So climate convergence is our trend, our third trend for today. And this is about all actors in the ecosystem really converging on this issue of climate change. So be it governments, businesses, brands, NGOs, financial institutions, and also citizens, consumers, and customers. Now, the challenge comes in that while we all agree, so 80% of us around the world agree that we're heading for environmental disaster unless we change our habits quickly, 7 in 10 of us feel that we're already doing all we can to save the environment. So a huge tension here in terms of thinking about how that concern plays out in terms of action. Now, from a brand perspective, it's going to be really important that you help demonstrate that it's going to take a collective approach. It's going to take all actors across the whole world to really focus on this, including the people you serve. And even those small behaviours can lead to bigger ones. So this is essential in fighting climate solutions. And as you can see on the screen, the solar panels technology is one way of tackling climate convergence, which takes us nicely on to our next trend. So as Ben mentioned, Techno Wonder is really about thinking about the challenges, benefits and concerns of technology all in one go. Now, you might all recognise macro level stats such as this one. So worldwide internet penetration rate almost doubling in the last 10 years since we launched Global Trends. But on a human level, it's not so clear cut. So we talk about cognitive polyphasia, which is this psychologist's idea of saying human beings can all hold more than 1 or 2 conflicting issues in their head at the same time. So we can see 73% of people in our survey are optimistic about what technology can do and that we need it to progress the world and challenge some of our concerns. But 73% of all of us are also worried about what it can do, the backlash to technology, how it's concerning us from a mental health perspective. And then 78% of us, so an even higher number, are saying, do you know what? Technology is here to stay and there's nothing we're going to do about it. They're feeling this very fatalistic attitude. So when it comes to technology, if you're working in this space or you're thinking about how you can tap into technology and innovate in this space, have a think about how you can build trust by educating people on the fantastic benefits that your new technology brings, but also let's be really clear and acknowledge the concerns that people have around privacy, disinformation and security. And a space this is going to be especially important in is in the world of healthcare. Now, conscientious health is our trend, which looks at health from a number of different angles. Of course, at the macro level, we see technology and data really playing a role here in terms of people being able to measure everything they're doing, their heart rate, their breathing, the watch telling you when to drink water. But they're also looking at more macro level ideas too. So the idea of wanting to live to 100, the idea of actually tackling some of the health challenges. So 6 in 10 of us around the world say that we'd like to lose weight. How they go about it is also a challenge. The other angle to this is the mental health versus physical health divide, and Ben mentioned this earlier. And for the first time in this series, we see equal numbers of people saying that they want to do more to look after their physical health as well as their mental health. And this statistic actually holds true across most of the generations. It's just the baby boomers who are slightly behind when it comes to prioritizing their mental health. And of course, we looked at this work across 50 countries around the world. Not all of those countries are equal when it comes to both access to care or the quality of care they get if they can access it. So from a takeaway for you perspective, try and help people navigate this world. Remember, it's quite complex for them, it's very unequal, and it's holistic, and they need a trusted source of guidance and evidence in this space to guide them along. The next trend I want to look at today, which is can be quite a controversial one, is this pushback to tradition. This is a signal that we're seeing on the ground that started in America. It's huge on TikTok, and it's this idea that's called trad wife. And it's the idea that women are really stepping back into their traditional gender roles and being homemakers. Now, we actually had a bit of feedback from the webinar this morning saying, well, this is quite a controversial point. You know, what's your response to this? And our response to it is, well, the survey actually underlies that traditions can be an important part of society. Of course, trad wives are just one way of expressing that, one signal that we're seeing on the ground that explains this. But we have to remember that everyone is an individual and they might express these attitudes in very different ways. So 8 in 10 of us agree that traditions are an important part of the society. The way we go about thinking about those traditions is going to look different depending on who we are, which segment of society we're in, and which country we are in around the world. Nearly 6 in 10 of us would like our country to be the way it used to be. And if you dive into the report, you can see the different flavours of nostalgia. and many of the countries that really would like to move back to old traditions, and there are a handful, including China and South Korea and Portugal, who actually said, no, actually we're quite happy with modern life today. So what does this mean for you? So yes, maybe play into the nostalgia point when it comes to things like communications, but make sure you balance this idealized view of the past with more modern considerations, taking in all those elements of the different folks in society. Another backlash we see to the world in terms of the challenges with globalization, the splintering of societies, the huge challenges at hand from a climate perspective, from a health perspective, from a technology perspective, is this sort of sod it attitude. So the nouveau nihilism trend, which is about living for today and really embracing today, because tomorrow will take care of itself. So this is an advertising campaign from a brand called Extreme in France. And I think this just exemplifies it in such a nice and simple way. They're basically saying, you know, eat our ice cream, eat it upside down, let the ice cream drip down your face, break the norms, break the category norms, and just have a great time. And again, this is underlined in our data. So when we look at this agreement scale of the important thing is to enjoy life today, tomorrow will take care of itself, we see this huge uplift in people saying this over the last 10 or so years. From your perspective, it's going to be really important to help people bridge the gap between their lived reality and their aspirations. We see, and I think this is a nice visual that explains this idea of the loss of the future playing into nouveau nihilism. So the fact that young people might not be able to get onto the housing ladder as quickly as they can, like their parents did. Maybe owning a home is completely out of their aspirations today. So think about that, bridging the gap there. And this guy, you know, he's just graduated from uni and he thinks, well, whatever, I'll just play computer games all day. And it's really important in terms of bridging that gap between reality and aspiration, that you have trust to do this. You're able to communicate ways in which people can do it through using your products and services. And brands are in a really, really strong place right now in 2024. 8 in 10 of us say that we're more likely to trust a new product if it's made by a brand that we already know. Those mental networks that we've built over time with our customers are already there. But what we also know is they're really easy to break as well. So 7 in 10 of us around the world also say that we're not happy with customer experience. So it's really important that we get the basics right. And this power of trust has been a trend that we've seen growing quite substantially over time. So you can see the 16 percentage point rise in those who say they tend to buy brands that reflect their personal values. So really important for brands to continue playing into this space of authenticity and trust and building that bridge and relationship with consumers. So from your perspective, think about leaning into values, your own values, marrying those with your consumers' values, but make sure you just don't get the basics wrong. Make sure you're not innovating for something really fun in the future if the basics aren't right. So make sure that balance is to be had. And one way that we can think about playing into people's values is to recognize them as individuals. Escape to individualism is our final trend. And it's really born out of this idea that 6 in 10 of us around the world feel too overwhelmed by the choices that we have in life. And the way that we're responding to that, one of the ways we're responding to that, is by stepping back into our individual beings. And that might be just searching for simplicity in life. It might be seeking curiosity. It might be focusing on our career, or it might just be making sure that we're really guiding our life through the principles that we hold true. And 8 in 10 of us around the world really agree with that. So they agree that it's up to everyone to work out their own set of principles to guide their decisions. And a great example of this is a signal that we see on the ground. And this is something that was born out of Nigeria. It's now going worldwide. And it's this idea of the soft life. So taking a step back, looking after yourself, looking after your well-being, and doing things that are nice for you, being you. Now, you're probably wondering how to play this out. So from an escape to individualism perspective, you can help people express their own sense of individuality and recognize this is lots of different ways of doing this. Show that you're on their side and provide reassurance and support. So what can you do with these trends? So if you download our report at ipsosglobaltrends.com, at the end of each trend section, we've provided some handy thought starters that you can take back to your teams. You can use them to challenge perceived views. You can use them to start thinking about what that means for your planning for next year. And if your stakeholders push back and say, well, actually, we just don't have time to do that, we need to just get the numbers over the line this year, you can hit them with these stats. So taking a step back and really focusing on the future leads to better growth, basically. So this is taken from a journal, and it found that those companies that stop, take stock, take into consideration the trends, the macro forces, the wider things that are happening in the environment, and put that to play in terms of their strategy planning, are outperforming the average by 200% higher growth and 33% higher profitability. So 2 stats to leave you today, and I'm going to hand back to Simon in the studio.
Well, thank you, Billy, for that panorama. As you said, there's so much material there. And we're going to, before we finish, we're just going to ask you for 1 or 2 pointers to some of the resources and some of the ways to think about this material. But for now, I'm thinking, if I'm on the bus with just 10 minutes to spare, where's your favourite place that I should look from the new report?
I think from my perspective, I'm really interested in this nostalgia point. I think it's a little bit controversial as a trend because not all flavors of nostalgia are appealing to everyone. But the analysis that we've done in our report looks at 4 different flavors of nostalgia and how that looks different in different markets around the world. And I think that can really help marketeers to think about a big trend, but how that can play out slightly differently on the ground. So again, tapping into that globalization point I made, by taking a global idea and playing that out locally. So that's a cool slide that you can keep in your back pocket for a dinner party conversation for sure.
Very good. And yeah, we might come back to that with Arno, because I'm conscious that's often a feature of advertising, both in the past and the present. Ben, are you feeling nostalgic about 10 years ago, your first report? You've got this 10 years on report now. What have you learned along the way? What's your advice for us to read these trends as, dare I say it, a veteran in this area?
Well, I think that the thing I'd say is that it's hard to spoon feed people this. So we've produced this. There's more data in it than ever. But the key point about trends, I think, activation and organisations getting to grip with this. And it's funny, one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, when we first talked about this at Cannes this summer, came up to me and said, I always find it difficult to bring this to life in the organisation. And I think the point here is, like marriage, you get out of trends what you put in. And it's about making the space and the time and the structure to be disciplined to go and do this. So we can give you all of this material and you can, but ultimately it will be about how you workshop it and apply it to your own category and to your own situation. And it's really encouraging people to be a bit disciplined and make time. And Billy's got, as we've got on the screen here, the data that shows that actually the organizations that do that do outperform. And Ipsos itself is currently engaged in one of its regular deep dive 5-yearly reviews of everything we do, because it is important to make time. So that's what I'd say, find time to do this. It is important, not every year, not every month, but you do need to make time for it.
Lovely, thank you. And perhaps as we make time to it, one of the things we need to do, particularly those of us working in international organizations, is to think about the context of different countries and different markets. And that's why, Paki, we're so pleased that you've stayed up late with us, because you've been looking at a range of different markets across Asia. Feels most appropriate for someone, a Thai guy who's working now in Malaysia, but also with clients across the continent. Tell us what you found reflecting on the findings from your perspective. The floor is yours.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Simon, for that. So first of all, let me take you to Asia. So it is such an exciting region at the moment. People believe that this is the time for Asia, as you can see from this article from World Economic Forum for this year, that this is the time for Asia. It's going to be an Asian century. But so there are a lot of expectation relying on Asia. But can Asia answer that expectation? So the message is quite a mix. On one hand, we have a country like India, which is by 2030 is expected to be the 3rd largest economy in the world, taking over Germany. And we have a region such as the Southeast Asia, which by 2031, their export is going to grow by 90%. This is compared to the global average of 30%. So it looks very exciting on that number. But on the other hand, the GDP growth rate in China for this year is expected at 4.7%, which is half of what it used to be in 2010. And we have a phenomenon of the shrinking middle class, which is now proven that it's not just happening in the West. In the country like Indonesia, the people who are defined as middle class has decreased by 17% compared to what it used to be in 2019. So with all these changes and differences, that's why the attitude of people in Asia is different across the countries, depends on where you are. And that is kind of show us about why you should not just take the region average as the reading. So look at example of two values. The first value is nostalgia, which we talked a lot before. If you're just looking at the number between global average and Asia average, it looks also almost the same. But when you look into the country level, you see that people who like things to be the way they are people like in India, Thailand, and Singapore, but not so for people in Japan, South Korea, or China. And the idea about another value of living for today and tomorrow taking care of itself, again, global and Asia number is quite close, but looking at our colleagues in China, we are looking at this from the trend called Tangping, which is lying flat, which is about anti-hustle culture, right? So there are a lot of differences by the country. And you're asking why there's also such a differences across the countries. It's also because of the population structure, right? Because we know that the whole world is going through an aging society, but some country is already moved along in that direction. A country like Japan or Korea on the right-hand side is already in a super age society. Some country is following that, like those in China, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and Singapore. There are a group of countries which are slightly younger, like those in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and India. Right. So, oops, I don't know what happened over there. Okay, thank you so much for bringing it back. Right. So, just a little bit on that. So with that of a population structure, then and you expect the growth from Asia, question is who's going to work on that growth, right? And one thing that we see is that the people in Asia also embracing immigration, because while this is going to be quite a controversial topic in the West, we see a more positive viewpoint on immigration in the Asia, especially on someone like Philippines, even in New Zealand. But on the other hand, the other side is immigration, about people moving to the other countries for work. We see that for people in Philippines, in India. So we can also expect a movement of workforce across the region as well. Another idea is about the role of women within the workforce. So the concept of a girl boss, which has been there for quite some time. For example, in Thailand, 83% of them say that things would work better if the women held a position in the government or in the companies. And this also reflected that Thailand is a country with the highest number of executives in the world at 30%. And by the way, we also just have our second female prime minister, which is also the youngest at the 38 years old. But on the other hand, our colleagues in Indonesia are saying that the main role of women is about being a good mothers and wives, which also reflect a strong traditional value in the term of role of women. Then we go to tech, right? Because again, this is the young region, and then people are embracing tech. The social media, which happen to be a bit of negative viewpoint in the West, but in Asia, it seems to be have a positive impact on people's life. But it also gives me a concern because Now people start to believe that they can socialize with friends online instead of just going out and meet them physically. So how is it going to translate into the future? That also give me some kind of a sleepless night. Another idea is about AI, which is such a big idea about, hey, we have a fear of AI going to take our job, but not that fear in Asia. They are still believe that AI going to create more jobs instead of destroying. And not just about creating jobs, they also believe that AI going to make the job easier. And this comes from a young country like, Vietnam, India, and Indonesia. We are talking about global, local, or global. So what is Asia stand in this point? So what we have is that whether the globalization is good for me, people in Asia have a positive viewpoint on globalization, and that's coming from, again, from young countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and China. But do they want to buy a product of the global brands? Do they feel that global brand make a better product? Maybe not so. If you are in Philippines, that might be yes. But if you are in some country like Japan, that might not be so, because we know that made in Japan already signify a good quality product. But at the end, you might be asking that, hey, but does that mean that do I need a different strategy for 10 countries in Asia? That might not be so. Yes, a localization might still need that. But at the end, looking back, we will see that consumer will want the same thing no matter where they are in the world. They want the brand that reflect their personal values. They want the brand that have image appeal to them. They want the brand that give them a better customer experience. And that gives us to the summary of my section. So what next for Asia, right? Is it going to be the next global powerhouse, driver of growth? Yes, it can be if you can embrace that diversity in Asia. So the first thing that we see is that in order for Asia to answer that growth, they need to embrace diversity in their workforce. This can be about immigration, this can be about older workforce, this can be about women in the workforce. And if the organization is looking to launch something like a tech-related product and services, Asia would be a good idea for that to be, because people in Asia embracing technology. And last point is about, at the end, give your customer as a core. At the end, the customers still want the brand that reflect their values, and they want a better customer experience. Back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you so much, Paki. And it's a textbook example of why those regional averages often hide more than they reveal. There's one area where it felt like we were seeing a pattern across the region. I'm talking to you from London, from Britain, where we're one of the gloomiest about AI and tech. I think the Americans maybe even gloomier than us. But that was one thing, this openness about new technologies. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about your perspectives on that point.
Sure. So first, let's look back and see that the Asia, again, many countries having a young population. So for them to embrace the tech is no surprise. Another thing is that this majority of the country in this region is a developing countries, right? They want to moving to be a developed country. And for them to do that, they need to embrace technology. And we can see this from the Asia countries have the highest of social media usage in the world. We also the region which embrace the new trends and behavior. So in terms of e-commerce, the word of live streaming is very, very popular from countries like in Southeast Asia or in China. So they not just have a positive attitude, they also behave in the technology-friendly way as well.
Lovely, thank you for that. We'll hopefully have some time to go back to you for one more question before there, but thank you so much, Paki, for your perspectives there, because that's really rich and important insights. Now, wherever we're working, whichever organization or whatever our role, we're probably looking to cut through with good communications to the audiences that matter most to us. And so we now have the pleasure of a student of advertising, if I may say so. Arno, you've been busy thinking through what good communications looks like in today's context reflecting some of the trends and patterns we've been exploring today. So the floor is yours for us to tell us what good can look like these days.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, Simon, for that. So indeed, we're going to look now together at some advertising that signals some of the trends that Billy, Ben, and Paki spoke about. As we know that advertising tends to reflect the broader context and the trends around the world. And this year, we're in a prime position, some of us attending the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, to see what the industry has to offer in that sense. For those of you who don't know the Cannes Lions, so it's a global festival that celebrates the best marketing and advertising work from across the world by, having awards which are called the Cannes Lions, but also having inspiring talks so you can learn everything that there is from these winners. And we could see that many of these Cannes Lions winners were actually anticipating or detecting some of the trends that we spoke about today. It's no surprise that the Cannes Lions winners are doing that. We know that understanding context is one of the most important factors for brands to drive success through Ipsos extensive R&D. By understanding context, you can then shape people's expectations. You can then act with empathy, and that's certainly a key starting point for you. So what I suggest we do now is we explore some of these trends and how they were reflected with great advertising and marketing initiatives. And let's start with splintered societies, because as Billy was telling us, some of us are kind of feeling left aside as the world moves forward, and brands can actually have decisive actions to bring those people back into life and into the world. And there's a great example coming from France, which earned Renault the Sustainable Development Goal Grand Prix, which is all about helping people living in rural areas in France with their mobility when they search for a job, going away and further from their homes by lending them a car so they can apply to a job, kilometers away from where they live, and get back into their work life. And if successful after the trial period, of course, having a leasing with Renault, a great way to support people. Another initiative takes us to Poland now, where MasterCard has been very active in helping Ukrainian refugees with an app which earned them the Creative Data Grand Prix in Cannes. And this app is helping Ukrainians relocate, not only in terms of housing opportunities, but identifying the job needs and the business needs of local Polish areas, so they can integrate seamlessly and go into places where they are most needed, so living in harmony with their Polish neighbors. So a great way, again, to bring back people together. Let's move now to another trend that we discussed a lot with Paki as well, which is techno wonder and the tension between whether technology is a force for good or we should worry about. And even the technology experts in Cannes were a bit conflicted about that. So Elon Musk, for example, told the Cannes audience that there is a 10 to 20% chance of something terrible happening with AI, that AI could make people optional, even though he said as well that certainly the best moment in history to witness. But at the same time, a lot of other tech platforms and tech experts here, for example, Alex Schultz, the CMO of Meta, said that AI could inspire a new wave of creativity like photography did. And quite interestingly, Cannes Lions winners also showed, that divide between a chance or sometimes something to worry about. On AI as a force for good, Pedigree in New Zealand earned the Outdoor Grand Prix by finding a way to repurpose their outdoor advertising to be true to their mission to do pets good, using AI to create photo quality pictures of shelter dogs and using their billboards to advertise these shelter dogs, and giving the opportunity of people with a QR code when walking near that poster to adopt the dog. And if you adopt it, then instantly replacing it with another one. So a great way to use AI for good. But at the same time, some other brands like Dutch Telecom, which won the Bronze Creative Strategy for that, has been warning people like parents about the fact that sharing pictures and video of your children could backfire with hackers using AI, which could create then deepfakes that could damage the kids' identity and their digital footprint. So something that now definitely we need to be a lot more cautious about as AI is out there. And acting responsibly is very important for brands, and there are some brands that have been so successful in doing that, earning the trust for decades of their audiences. Dove is a fantastic example of that, fighting for real beauty, and has been doing that for more than 20 years now. In their latest initiatives, they tried to tackle and influence Gen AI picture models, which, when prompted, speaking about beauty, would give, very fake and standard portraits. So, pleading for more diversity and real beauty representation to influence the picture models to show real beauty in all its diversity. So a great initiative from Dove, which is a great way as well for them to further cement their brand essence and how they are connecting with their audience. And let's conclude our travels with nouveau nihilism, which is this trend of, people want to go away from traditions and conventions and make the most living in the moment, which is especially true with the younger generation. That translates in advertising in brands that are going in the same vein to break conventions and break the codes. And let me give you two examples of that. The first example is coming from CeraVe, which is a new L'Oreal brand that clearly broke the beauty advertising codes. Instead of having, a model ambassador, they hired a comedian, Michael Cera, and they broke all the codes of beauty advertising using humor with a clear purpose to build the awareness of the brand quickly at a key moment, which was the Super Bowl, and clearly being one of the most successful brands in the Super Bowl this year, according to our own research. And let me give you another example of another brand, which is exactly breaking every code of their category, which is Liquid Death. So Liquid Death, as the name does not suggest, is a brand of water. And they've changed their packaging, moving away from plastic bottles to an aluminum can. And in their advertising, they are featuring zombies, as if you were in a 90s bad horror movie and showing how you can rehydrate them. So clearly being a misfit to stand out, to connect with the new generation, which earned them a value of 1.4 billion in just a few years. And now it's the third most followed beverage brand across social media. So what should you make of that? I think that if you have three takeaways from Cannes Lions, they are all around harnessing context to your brand benefit. Thinking about the context of people that they are facing in the world, and as a brand, trying to take a role into that and support them. Making sure that you tap in the power of artificial intelligence for good, but you do that in a responsible way, and keeping humans in control and some human intelligence. And for accrued creative effectiveness, daring to be a misfit and change the codes of your category to stand out and to be as effective as possible. And in that sense, clearly the global trends are the perfect starting point for you to understand people's context and to find the best way to harness it for your brand success. So that's it for me, Simon.
Well, thank you, Arnaud, and thank you for really giving us that kind of exposition of the different things that we saw in Cannes and linking it back. Now, I know you've been talking to me about Cannes, and I know it's been going since the 50s, I think I've got that right. But if we just went back 10 years to when we first did the global trends, what would we be finding from the Cannes winners then? Would that be very different, or would it be the kind of same sort of thing, but maybe not quite so fancy technology?
Yes, so I think you said it. So technology was there already, but you know, the impact of artificial intelligence is such that now, you know, it's such a key driver that more and more advertisers and agencies are using it. Certainly, as well, there's a kind of an accrued pressure for brands to be more active with citizens and to have more of a social role. And we see more and more of that as people are tend to turn more to brands in that respect. And maybe one thing that you know has always been true is that if you want to be successful, if you want to stand out and be effective, you need to break the codes. It's just that maybe it's even more important now, given all the content and all the touch points that we have access to. So to stand out, you need to be even more daring and even more of a misfit.
Okay, well, good advice. Okay, yeah, okay. So break the codes is the advice. Thank you for that. We've got time for one more question I've got for Ben, and then Billy, we're going to close with you, just giving us some advice on where we can go next with this material. Now, Ben, more than one of our clients has been putting nouveau nihilism, globalization, fractures, splintered societies together, and the sense is this is all a bit gloomy. Are there any reasons to be cheerful in all of this data?
Remember that people are always pessimistic about the public realm as a whole or the overall future of their country, and much more optimistic in general about their own personal realm. And I think the fact that you've seen how people are looking after themselves, real, you know, self-actualization or just escapism, you know, people manage. It's just that it is true that the global context is quite challenging. I don't think we couldn't write this report and pretend that everything was brilliant, because quite frankly, there are some huge challenges facing the world. But humanity has ways of coping. And actually, if we wound the clock back 50 years to when I was a kid, and you looked at the early 1970s, at that point, we were predicting global famine by the turn of the century. We were predicting that the oil and many key minerals like platinum would have run out, and nuclear war. It didn't happen. I think humanity is tuned to look for problems and then fix them. That's how we conquered the world. So yeah, I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but just pretending that everything was wonderful would probably have been a bit, well, I couldn't have taken myself seriously. I think what's interesting is the coping strategies that so many billions of people use and still have, you know, and are still pretty happy.
Thank you. So yeah, so resilience, I think maybe our reason, yes, not to be too gloomy. Thanks for that. Now, Billy, we're going to finish with you because you've just been thinking through this question of, you know, there's a lot of material for us to draw on. Each of us will have different roles or different priorities. Just a couple of pointers, if that's all right, on how we might use this in different contexts.
Absolutely. So we've just given you a really, really brief overview today, and the report, while it's more detailed, is still obviously a public report that's supposed to speak to all of our clients across all of our markets, across the public and private sector. But the power with global trends is the 5 million data points that sits behind it, the updated macro force framework, the signals that we've collected. And here are 3 ways that we've helped clients to hack that, to analyze that with their business lens in mind. So we helped understand society for a national broadcaster. We looked at a decade of social trends. We analysed that in light of their business challenge, and we presented it to their board. We helped an FMCG company to really understand the markets within Latin America to help them shape their innovation strategy. And a bit like what we just seen with Arno, we helped a huge financial services firm really understand what Gen Z was about and what it wasn't, and help that to use that understanding to, you know, to position them and their communications going forward. So there's a wealth of things that it can do. Talk to us to hear more, I think, is my final word.
Absolutely, so different routes in and depending on our priorities and lots of different angles. So thank you for that, Billy. Billy, you mentioned the report, and we'll be sending this deck to everybody, including a link to where you can find more on our website. As Billy says, we're looking forward to these conversations about what's most interesting and what has most resonance with you. So all of the material will be coming your way tomorrow. If you like Arno, you can have more of him next week, because he has a webinar where we're looking at 6, not 60, shades of the CAN context, and really going into a little bit more detail on those kind of communication success stories and communications lessons from CAN. And if you like our webinars, we'd love to see you back in about 6 weeks' time, when we're going to be on another topic which we've been researching over the years, the perils of perception, and trying to understand a little bit more about how the world feels from people's perspectives around the world. That's picking up on some of the topics we've talked about today. But for now, thank you to our panel for putting this together for us, and thank you to everybody for being on the call, and we're looking forward to further conversation soon. All the very best.
Thank you.